Finally, let's talk about medium content books. So, broadly speaking, low content books are anything that requires less writing than a full book, whether it be a novel or whether it's a nonfiction book. And I would say anything under 25,000 words, I would consider within the realm of low content, but anything over 10,000 words, maybe even, 5 or 6,000 words if you really want to, might be medium content. So it has more content than some of the other books that we have talked about, more words, a little bit more effort to produce. But I do believe that, if you kind of take a broader view, you'll find a lot more possibilities and a lot more little niches and corners that you can work in that are more untapped. So medium content books, so a workbook, I've kind of touched on this already in an earlier video, but anything that you can teach or show somebody where it would be useful for them to either answer some questions about their own situation or maybe answer something that implements it for their own uses. So it could be personal development, where you are taking them through a personal development journey, maybe something like quitting smoking. Again, so if you were quitting smoking, you might teach them something, give them some questions to apply that to their own situation or their own life, and then go on to the next topic and teach them that. It could also just be something that you are teaching them, how to make beer at home or how to make wine at home, and then ask some questions, give them the opportunity to implement themselves. So there's a fine line between the kind of journals that we talked about in the last video and this sort of workbook. Maybe even a better example might be a topic like how to create your own business plan. So you're teaching them the steps in creating a business plan and then giving them the opportunity to write in the answers for their own situation, for their own business. And I think this also works really well if you do have a nonfiction book, that you can create a companion workbook with it so that, somebody who reads the book can maybe be sold also on getting the workbook. And then you've got 2 sales from 1 customer. So next we have cookbooks. So in terms of niches, think similar to the recipe journals we talked about in the low content video. So you can narrow it down to a certain type of food, a certain regional cuisine. So regions, you could do Northeast United States, Southwest United States, Italian cooking, Mexican cooking, all sorts of regional types of styles. You can also do like only seafood, only vegan, different types of diets, and also specialty diets, so gluten-free. You could do a specific type of food. So, fermentation has been pretty big in recent years. So, how to do kombucha. Smoothies, there's been whole books written just with smoothie recipes. So you can really niche it down in a lot of different ways. You could also do easy books, maybe if someone's teaching their kid how to cook, maybe as part of a life skills or homeschool, you could do a cooking book that addresses that, maybe teaches a child how to cook. That would be another way to niche it down. Also, think about maybe even a reference book in relation to cookbooks, either as part of your cookbook or as its own separate book. So a lot of books that the big publishers are doing will have a dictionary of ingredients or terms or techniques, and especially when it's a certain type of cooking or a certain region. So, for example, baking, might have its own terminology and its own specific ingredients that you might need to be familiar with. Or perhaps a certain region might have its own ingredients that are common to that type of cooking that you might need to know about. So that's cookbooks. Kids nonfiction. This is wide open. You could really do anything for nonfiction. anything that you're knowledgeable about in particular. What I would do is I would start with an older audience. So high school kids are almost using adult level books for their research. So I'm not sure I would do high school, although if you are qualified to teach something at the high school level, I would say go for it, because I think that that is an area where people aren't really making specialized books. So for middle school, I would probably start there. So grades 7 to 8 or so, ages maybe 12 to 14. And then I would repurpose that for the grade 4 to 6, which would be roughly ages 9 to 11. And then repurpose that again for K through 3, which would be roughly ages 5 through 8. So, take the same topic, let's say George Washington, and start out with a more comprehensive book and then simplify it down, and you've got 3 books out of one set of research. So to find topics for that, let's go to the internet. I've talked before about looking to the Common Core. It can be a little confusing to find information on the Common Core. So I think the easiest way to go about it is, again, to look to the homeschoolers and look at books that are written towards that. So these books here, like what your 5th grader needs to know, what your 6th grader needs to know, these are available used fairly reasonably. So if I was writing to a certain age group, I would probably get a book like this. Maybe you can even find it in your local library, and just pick up a used copy, and then you've got an idea of all the different topics that these grades need to know about. So that can be a good place to start. Also, just look at homeschool curriculum. So this is a subscription, so that's why that's so expensive. But there are similar books for 7th grade math, 7th grade history. And, if you can find a used copy of that, again, don't copy what they're doing, but use it to find out what sort of topics you can create books around related to those different age groups. So in terms of kids' fiction, early readers can have a pretty low word count. So I'm thinking kind of 2nd to 3rd grade would be a medium content book. We talked about kids fiction already for younger kids as a low content. So a little higher word count. Usually the 2nd, 3rd, maybe even 4th grade level, they are doing very simple novels. And I think just from my own kids' experience, adventure and humor goes over really well. And there's a lot of series out there that use the same characters and puts them in different situations. So Geronimo Stilton comes to mind. And, for the older people watching this, the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew. I mean, those are all series of books that are geared towards people kind of, I remember reading Nancy Drew in 3rd grade. So, they are short novels, easy to read, but use the same characters. And then you've got a series going, and you can sell repeat copies of books in the series to the same customer. Very specific nonfiction. So this would be kind of a short read. I would think that this might be anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 words, where you're answering one question or problem really thoroughly. And I would look first to your own expertise for this, something that you feel comfortable teaching about, or something you're interested in that you can research, because people can see through when you get it wrong. So you don't want to get it wrong. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you have been in a certain niche or area for a while. So again, start with your own expertise. I think that's the best place to start, because you don't want to try and paint yourself as an expert in something you're not an expert in. So how would you find topics? I would take a topic you know about, and then I would go to a site like Answer the Public, or even just do a Google search. So if we were to do a search for let's say how to photograph, well, let's see, how to photograph food. So I would look at, this page is going to take a minute to load here. So you can look at the related searches, how to photograph food with a phone for Instagram, tricks, lighting, settings for your DSLR. Any of these could be a short book on its own, how to photograph food with a phone, how to photograph for Instagram, food photography tricks. The settings in the DSLR, I might combine those two together. So you can do that. There's also the related searches up here. And you can also go to a site like Answer the Public and do the same search, find out what questions come up. Or if you don't have access to that, maybe Uber Suggest, or there's also a site called alsoasked.com, which will give you the also asked questions. Whereas Answer the Public, I think, draws from the suggested keywords. So those are two different places I would look for all the questions around a very micro topic. So like if I were going to take a topic like food photography lighting, then I would use that keyword and put it into alsoasked.com. I would put it into Answer the Public, and just a few different keyword tools to find as many of the questions people want to know about that small topic as possible, so that I could create a short book that comprehensively covers it. I mean, think of it like just a long blog post. You could probably write this sort of book in a week or so if you wrote, 1,000 or so pages a day. So that would be a very specific nonfiction book. That probably works better as an ebook if it's too short. I'm not sure of the exact word count for a print book. I'm going to do some research on that, and I will put some information in the description of this video on that, because I want to take a look at some books that I've published and how big they turned out as a print book versus the word count. So I will put that information in the description. So short stories, you can create a series. I think that's a great idea. Anytime you can put something in a series, Amazon can connect those together, and then your other books will show up not only on your author page, but also under any particular listing. So at any point of entry that somebody finds you, they'll see some of your other books if they're part of a series. So this is something too. You might look to the public domain. In magazines way back when did a lot of serial stories. So you could maybe rewrite something like that. Now, I would not just change the character names and write the exact same story, but I think a great example of a rewrite, a total rewrite, is Pride and Prejudice and Bridget Jones's Diary. So I think it's rewritten so well that if the main character wasn't named Mr. Darcy in Bridget Jones's Diary, we may not even picked up on the fact that it was a rewrite of Pride and Prejudice. So, not only change the names of the characters, but change stuff about the characters, change a little bit about the situation, read a chapter and kind of get a feel for what happened here, and write a similar story with a completely different situation that kind of gets the same feel or action across. So to use the Bridget Jones Diary example again, we've got the basic story of, meeting someone, and there's this kind of abrasive interaction at first, and then there's the swashbuckling, handsome person that comes in as a secondary love interest, but turns out to be a total cad, and then, we find that the first person, it really isn't so abrasive at all, and everything works out. So kind of take the general concept of the story and write new situations. And a lot of times from public domain, you're going to have to update the situations, because what happened back then is not necessarily relevant or makes sense to today's audience. So there's lots of different indexes online for finding public domain. This is onlinebooks.library.upenn.edu. And so it's the online books page, archives and indexes. So it gives you links to all different sorts of repositories, so major repositories, and then other indexes and search aids, and then some for non-English, maybe translating something from another language. If you are bilingual, you could maybe look into translating something. And then there's different archives for all different kinds of topics. So you could look at science fiction, fantasy, horror, serial, folklore might be another place to find fiction stories. Just know that you do your research to make sure something is truly in the public domain. In 2020, we are looking at 1924 and earlier here in the U.S. If you are not in the U.S., then you will want to look at what is in public domain for your particular country. And finally, we have image-driven nonfiction. So this can be data visualization, infographics, explains a topic by using a lot of images and fewer words. So obviously this will work best for niches with lots of data because you can't necessarily visualize in charts every single niche. But I want to show you a couple examples of what I mean by this. So this book is called Knowledge is Beautiful, and they have a website called informationisbeautiful.net, but they've published a couple books too. So this is just the look inside. So this is the index, and so they are doing all sorts of different charts about information. So how many gigatons of carbon dioxide, best in show, this is all about dogs, and train wrecks, best and worst railways, something about movies, recycling, and fallacies. So they've put a lot of different things into infographic style. So this is something you could easily do on Canva or PowerPoint to create these sorts of things. And I think PowerPoint is actually a great thing for infographics because it's got so many tools built into it for creating charts. The other one I wanted to show you is Coffee Isn't Rocket Science. They've done another book like this on wine, and I would guess there's more than that. So, this has a little bit more information. So it starts out with a little quiz there, and then it talks about different types of coffee and just kind of does it with a sentence or so about each one and little illustrations. Shows you where all the coffee regions are in the world and a little blurb about it. And something about the cafe. Now we start talking about coffee beans themselves. So there is some text there, but there's a lot of pictures and charts. So I think this is a great example of nonfiction that has fewer words and lots of image, but it still gets an educational message across. So ways to grind your coffee. And again, with this sort of book, I would look at a lot of the question keyword tools to find out what people want to know about a specific topic. So if I were writing this coffee book, we might go just like they have with beans, all about the beans, how to grind coffee, how to make coffee. And then once you have a list of topics, go and look at the questions people are asking and answer them with short blurbs, graphs, and charts. Okay, so hopefully I've given you tons of ideas for the types of books that you can create. Low content isn't just journals and planners and notebooks. So think about the broad variety of things that you can create. And in the next section of this course, we're going to start looking at options for designing your book. I'll see you there.